when she saw the way that this woman had changed her grandson forever, had destroyed the relationship between brothers, had destroyed the relationship between sister-in-law. That's when she had had enough.
By the end of Queen Elizabeth II's life, the real crisis around Harry and Meghan may not have been any one interview, accusation, or tabloid headline. It may have been something more dangerous for the monarchy than a bad news cycle, a total collapse of trust. Because once trust is gone, every gap starts to look like a cover-up. Every inconsistency becomes a clue. Every silence starts feeding a bigger story. That is the space this controversy lives in. In the months before the Queen died at Balmoral in September 2022, reports from royal biographers and palace-connected sources described a monarch who was badly ill, physically diminished, and deeply distressed by family turmoil. Some of those accounts go further. They claim she had become convinced that something about the Sussex children's births and the way the matter had been handled did not add up.
This case about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump, the fact is Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince Archie.
Those claims remain unproven. But the fact they exist at all tells you how serious the distrust had become behind palace walls. And that is what makes this story bigger than gossip. Because this is not just about whether people liked Meghan, or whether Harry and Meghan were treated unfairly, or whether the Oprah interview poisoned the relationship beyond repair. The more consequential issue is the one the monarchy could never openly touch without detonating a constitutional and media disaster. The question of succession, legitimacy, and whether palace silence allowed speculation to spiral into something much darker. That is the pressure point. The source of the tension is simple. Under long-standing royal rules, line of succession questions are not symbolic. They are legal, constitutional, and deeply sensitive. So when rumors began circulating about surrogacy, those rumors did not stay in the celebrity lane. They moved straight into institutional territory. Again, there is no public proof that those rumors are true. None. But once that suspicion entered the conversation, every odd detail around Archie's birth started being reread through that lens. Harry's own account in Spare became part of that debate. Critics focused on details in his description of labor and delivery that some medical professionals have argued sound implausible. The timeline around epidurals, departure from the hospital, and post-birth recovery struck skeptics as unusually compressed. Claims in the source about preeclampsia and near-immediate discharge are also presented as evidence that the official narrative does not make medical sense. Those interpretations are contested, and none of them independently prove surrogacy. But they helped build the impression that the public story was unstable. Then there was the confusion around the announcement itself. Royal births are normally managed with almost obsessive clarity. Timing matters, procedure matters, messaging matters. But when Archie was born, the rollout looked messy. Different explanations circulated. Journalists got conflicting information. The usual precision that surrounds royal protocol seemed to vanish at exactly the moment when clarity should have mattered most. That did not prove anything either, but it added to the same pattern: inconsistency, confusion, and a lack of confidence in the official account. And once that pattern takes hold, people start pulling in everything: the infamous moon bump clips, the Birkenhead footage, side-by-side pregnancy photos that online commentators insist show dramatic changes in shape, size, and positioning. Later, even Meghan's own social media-style presentation of motherhood became part of the argument, with critics using a June 2025 hospital dancing video to say she treats even childbirth-adjacent moments as staged content. On their own, these pieces are not hard evidence of a hidden pregnancy arrangement. But in a climate already poisoned by suspicion, they became fuel. That is how a rumor hardens, not because one piece of evidence settles it, but because dozens of unresolved details get bundled into one narrative. And once people believe they are looking at a pattern, they stop seeing separate incidents. They see confirmation. The palace's problem is that it has no clean way to answer a controversy like that. If Buckingham Palace aggressively challenged those rumors, it would turn an online obsession into an official constitutional confrontation. If it stayed silent, the silence would be interpreted as fear. And if race entered the conversation, as it already had after the Oprah interview, any scrutiny of the children's status could be cast not as a legal question, but as a moral attack. That is why this became such a trap. The source material argues that the Queen believed she was cornered by exactly that dilemma. If she pushed for proof, she risked igniting a global storm around racism, legitimacy, and the monarchy's treatment of Harry and Meghan. If she did nothing, she would be leaving unresolved doubts hanging over the institution she had spent her entire life trying to stabilize. Whether that private confrontation happened exactly as described is impossible to verify from the material alone, but the scenario fits the larger royal pattern. The monarchy can survive scandal. It can survive family feuds. What it struggles to survive is ambiguity around the rules that define it. That is why this story has lasted. It also explains why the absence of normal public visibility around Archie and Lilibet keeps getting folded back into the argument. Supporters would say Harry and Meghan are protecting their children's privacy. Critics say the children are strangely absent, given how photographed celebrity life in California usually is. School runs, casual sightings, ordinary family moments, routine public presence, all of it has been unusually limited compared with what people expect from high-profile public figures. That absence does not prove deception. But again, in an atmosphere of distrust, absence becomes evidence in the public imagination. And that may be the real tragedy at the center of all this. Because once a royal family starts communicating through silence, selective appearances, memoirs, leaks, and counter-leaks, the public stops receiving a coherent story. What replaces it is a marketplace of interpretation. And in that marketplace, the most dramatic version nearly always wins. So the question is not just whether the allegations in this source are true, it is why so many people are prepared to believe them. The answer is that Harry and Meghan's credibility took repeated hits. The palace never established a clear and trusted counter-narrative, and the monarchy's constitutional rules make the subject impossible to dismiss as mere gossip. If this were only about celebrity culture, the story would have burned out. It didn't burn out because it touches inheritance, titles, succession, and the last years of a queen whose authority rested on continuity and duty. That is what gives the controversy weight. By this reading, the Queen's final frustration was not simply anger at Meghan, and not simply disappointment in Harry. It was the deeper fear that personal decisions, half-explained stories, and public grievance politics had collided with the one thing the Crown cannot afford to look casual about: legitimacy. And that is why this still hangs in the air. King Charles has not moved to publicly reopen anything. The line of succession remains unchanged. No definitive public release has arrived to settle the speculation once and for all. So the vacuum remains. And when a vacuum remains around a story like this, people do what they always do. They fill it. Maybe the rumors are baseless. Maybe they are not. But the institution's inability to close the question cleanly is precisely what keeps the story alive. In the end, that may be the sharpest way to understand the Queen's final chapter in this saga. Not as a woman chasing gossip in her last days, but as a monarch confronted with a modern royal nightmare. A family crisis that could not be publicly examined without risking even greater damage than the suspicion itself. That is why this story refuses to die. Because it is no longer just about Meghan. It is no longer just about Harry. It is about what happens when the monarchy asks the public to trust what it will not clearly explain. And that may be the part that lands hardest. Because in the end, this was never just about one interview, one accusation, or one more royal feud dragged into public view. It became something much bigger than that. A story about trust breaking down at every level. Inside the family, inside the institution, and in front of the public. The palace stayed silent. Harry and Meghan told their version. Critics kept pulling apart the details. Supporters called it persecution. And somewhere inside all of that noise, the one thing that never arrived was clean, final clarity. That is why this saga still has weight, not because every allegation has been proven, not because every rumor deserves belief, but because when the facts stay sealed off, suspicion takes over. And once that happens, the story stops belonging to the people at the center of it. It turns into something larger, darker, and much harder to control. If the official story is solid, people ask why it was never locked down. If it is not, people ask how long the institution expected that to hold. Either way, the damage is already done. Because a monarchy runs on symbolism, but it survives on credibility. And credibility is a lot easier to lose than it is to rebuild. So maybe that is the real ending here. Not a neat revelation. Not a perfect smoking gun. Just a royal crisis that kept expanding because nobody involved could shut the door on it for good. And that is why this conversation is not going away. Because when a story leaves behind this many contradictions, this much bitterness, and this much silence, people do not move on. They keep looking, they keep asking, and they keep coming back to the same unresolved question. What really happened behind the walls when the stakes were at their highest? That question is still hanging there. And until it is answered, this saga stays alive. If you want more deep dives like this, more breakdowns without the polished palace packaging, and more stories where the subtext matters just as much as the headline, stay with BarzBuzz. Because when the official version starts cracking, that is where the real story begins. If this saga had you shook, wait till you see what's next. You already know what it is. BarzBuzz got the real, raw, and unfiltered breakdowns. So don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with someone who needs to catch up.